Most women trying to lose weight are focused on two things: what they are eating and how much they are moving. And those two things matter, genuinely, but they are not the whole picture, and for a significant number of women, they are not even the primary obstacle. The primary obstacle is something that has nothing to do with food choices or workout frequency and everything to do with what is happening inside their body at a hormonal level every single day. Chronic stress is driving fat storage, blocking fat release, increasing hunger, destroying muscle, disrupting sleep, and making every dietary and exercise effort produce a fraction of the result it should. And the women experiencing this are not failing because they are not trying hard enough. They are failing because they are fighting fat gain with the wrong tools while the actual cause sits completely unaddressed. Cortisol is the center of this entire conversation, and understanding what it actually does inside your body changes the way you look at your results completely. Cortisol is your primary stress hormone, produced by your adrenal glands in response to any perceived threat, and it exists for a genuinely good reason. In an acute stress situation, a real physical threat that requires an immediate response, cortisol does exactly what you want it to do. It raises blood sugar to provide immediate fuel. It increases heart rate and blood flow to the muscles. It sharpens focus and suppresses non-essential functions so your body can deal with the immediate situation efficiently. This response evolved over hundreds of thousands of years, and it is remarkably effective for what it was designed to handle. The problem is that your body produces the same cortisol response to psychological and emotional stress that it produces to physical threats, and it cannot distinguish between a situation that requires immediate physical action and one that requires sitting at a desk feeling anxious for 8 hours. A difficult conversation, a financial worry, a work deadline, a relationship conflict, a sleepless night, an aggressive diet, an intense workout. All of these things trigger cortisol release, and when stress is chronic rather than acute, when these triggers are present most days rather than occasionally, cortisol stays elevated continuously rather than spiking and then returning to baseline. That chronically elevated cortisol is what does the damage to your body composition, and it does it through several specific mechanisms that compound each other in a way that makes fat loss feel genuinely impossible. The most direct mechanism is fat storage. Cortisol signals your body to store fat, and it signals it to store that fat specifically around the midsection. The reason for this is that abdominal fat is physically close to your liver and vital organs, making it the most rapidly accessible fuel source during a threat. Your body is essentially keeping its emergency fuel tank as full as possible in case it needs to respond physically to whatever is stressing it. From a survival perspective, this is brilliant. From the perspective of a woman trying to reduce her waist size, it is one of the most frustrating biological realities in existence. You can be eating in a calorie deficit and still accumulate abdominal fat if your cortisol is chronically elevated, because the hormonal signal to store fat in that area is powerful enough to override the mathematical calculation of calories in versus calories out. The second mechanism is fat release suppression. Cortisol does not just promote fat storage, it actively inhibits lipolysis, which is the process by which your body breaks down stored fat to use as fuel. When cortisol is high, your body is in a state that favors holding onto fat rather than releasing it, because releasing fat stores during a perceived threat would deplete the emergency reserves your body is trying to protect. The result is a body that is simultaneously storing fat more aggressively and releasing it more reluctantly, which is the hormonal definition of a fat loss environment that has been completely shut down regardless of what the diet looks like. Muscle breakdown is the third mechanism, and it is the one with the longest-lasting consequences for your metabolism. Cortisol is a catabolic hormone, meaning it promotes the breakdown of tissue for fuel, and muscle tissue is one of its primary targets during periods of chronic elevation. Your body under chronic stress is constantly breaking down muscle at an accelerated rate, while simultaneously making it harder to build new muscle because the anabolic processes that drive muscle growth are suppressed in a high cortisol environment. The practical outcome is a gradual but progressive loss of muscle mass that reduces your resting metabolic rate, slows your metabolism, and makes fat gain increasingly easy and fat loss increasingly difficult over time. Women who have been under chronic stress for months or years often have significantly less muscle mass than they should for their activity level, and that muscle deficit is a primary driver of the metabolic slowdown they experience. Hunger is where chronic stress makes daily life genuinely difficult in a way that has nothing to do with willpower. Cortisol directly increases appetite, particularly for calorie-dense foods high in sugar and fat, because your body is trying to replenish the energy it believes it is expending in response to a threat. It also disrupts the hormones that regulate hunger and fullness. increasing ghrelin and decreasing leptin in a pattern that makes you feel hungrier than your actual caloric needs justify and less satisfied by the food you eat. The food cravings that accompany chronic stress are not psychological weakness or poor discipline. They are a direct hormonal instruction from a body trying to fuel itself through what it perceives as a threatening situation and fighting those cravings through willpower alone, while the underlying cortisol remains elevated, is one of the least effective approaches to managing stress-driven eating that exists. Sleep is where the cortisol cycle becomes fully self-reinforcing and impossible to escape without deliberately breaking it. Chronic stress elevates cortisol at night, and elevated cortisol at night directly suppresses melatonin and keeps your nervous system in a state of activation that prevents deep restorative sleep. Poor sleep then elevates cortisol further the following day, because sleep deprivation is itself a physiological stressor that triggers the stress response. It also increases ghrelin and decreases leptin independently of the cortisol effect, compounding the hunger dysregulation that cortisol was already producing. And it reduces growth hormone release, which happens primarily during deep sleep, and which is essential for muscle maintenance and fat metabolism. The combination of elevated cortisol, disrupted hunger hormones, and suppressed growth hormone from a single night of poor sleep creates a body composition environment the following day that is almost comprehensively opposed to fat loss. And this environment repeats itself every day that the sleep remains poor. Insulin resistance is the metabolic consequence of chronic cortisol elevation that most stress and fat gain conversations never reach, and that has significant long-term implications. Cortisol raises blood sugar as part of its emergency fuel response, and chronically elevated cortisol means chronically elevated blood sugar, which means chronically elevated insulin as your body tries to manage it. Over time, this repeated insulin elevation reduces your cell's sensitivity to insulin, a condition called insulin resistance, which means your body needs to produce more insulin to achieve the same blood sugar management effect. Elevated insulin is a fat storage hormone that keeps your body in a fat-storing state for more hours of the day, makes fat release harder, and creates a metabolic environment that strongly favors fat gain even at calorie intakes that would be neutral or negative for someone with normal insulin sensitivity. Exercise is complicated by chronic stress in a way that most fitness content handles poorly. Exercise is itself a stressor, and it produces a cortisol response as part of normal physiological adaptation. In a well-recovered, well-nourished body, that cortisol response is short, appropriate, and followed by an adaptation that makes the body stronger and more capable. In a chronically stressed, underslept, underfueled body, that cortisol response is added on top of an already elevated baseline, recovery is incomplete, adaptation is blunted, and the net effect of the training session is more stress without the compensating benefit. This is why women who are under significant life stress and simultaneously training intensely and restricting their diet often feel worse and look worse over time rather than better, because every component of their approach is adding to a stress load that their body cannot recover from. The solution to stress-driven fat gain is not trying harder with diet and exercise. It is addressing the cortisol environment directly, sleep treated as the highest priority recovery tool available, training volume calibrated to what your current recovery capacity can actually handle rather than what you think you should be doing. Eating enough food to signal to your body that it is not under threat rather than compounding the stress signal with restriction. And genuine stress management, not as a lifestyle wellness bonus, but as a direct fat loss intervention that addresses the primary hormonal driver of the fat gain that diet and exercise alone cannot touch. Your body is not storing fat because you are not disciplined enough. It is storing fat because it genuinely believes it needs to. And changing that belief requires changing the signals you are sending it, rather than just working harder against a hormonal current that is stronger than any amount of effort can overcome.